Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be going through activity 2-4 titled Configuring Windows Updates with Group Policy. This is from the MCSE/MCSA Guide to Microsoft Windows Server 2012 Administration in preparation of exam 70-411. In my version of the book, this activity begins at the bottom of page 63. Quick background about the activity. We have configured a server with the WSUS role, the Windows Server Update Services role, that allows that server to push Windows updates to machines on our domain. So our domain computers no longer have to connect to the internet to connect to Microsoft in order to download their updates. Our server will download all the updates that we specify, and then our computers will look at our own server for those updates. So this is really good at minimizing internet traffic on your network. Before we really dig into configuring client-side targeting for WSUS, I want to do a little bit of preparation, management side in Active Directory. I want to be a little bit more organized than the default. Currently I have my Windows 8 computer in the default computers OU here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new OU. And we're just going to call this 411 domain 1 machines. And inside of that OU, I'm going to create another OU that's simply going to be called desktops. If I had laptops, I would make another OU right here for laptops, and that would help me separate out my workstations versus my laptops. Often you'll have different policies, especially when it comes to like power management and stuff like that. So it's a good idea to get in a habit of separating stuff out so you have a little bit more granular control. Beyond that, I'm going to add another organizational unit here, and we're just going to call this one groups. Inside of groups, I'm going to create a new group, and it's just going to be called desktops. And I'm going to go ahead and add that Windows 8 computer. So that way we can take our machine, put it down here into this OU, and we've also assigned it to a group. So there are several different ways we can apply policies to that machine now. And I did title this 411 Domain 1 machines, depending on your organization. If you have different departments and you want to separate it by departments, then you're fine creating an organizational unit for HR, and then a separate one for sales, and then a separate one for executives. It really depends on your specific environment, how you want to have these organized, and how much control you want to have over individual groups. Okay, so now that my Active Directory is a little bit more organized, we're going to get started by configuring a group policy to tell that Windows 8 computer to look at our server, our WSUS server, for updates. Once we open our group policy management, we see that we have that OU for the machines and one specifically for desktops. So this is the group policy side. I haven't created a policy to apply to that desktop yet, so that's where we're going to get started. So right here, we're going to select create a new GPO and link it here. And we're just going to call this WSUS for desktops. And we can actually select the GPO, the group policy object, and we can see that currently it's applying to all authenticated users within this OU, which normally would be fine, but I don't necessarily want to apply this to users. I specifically want to lock this down on the computers themselves. So I'm going to remove authenticated users, and instead I'm going to add in a group for the desktops. So that way, if I come back in and I end up with 50 or 1,000 different desktops, but I want them all to apply this policy, I can join those individual machines to this group. And then I can also create another policy for maybe security. If I have a script that I can run across the network to install an antivirus, then I can just target the desktop group and apply it to all of them at once. Same thing for firewall settings. If you need to open or close specific ports, managing by group is usually a little bit quicker than trying to do each individual machine. So that's just something to keep in mind as far as your organization. So to go ahead and edit the policy, we can view in settings that it doesn't have any configuration set up yet. And so we're going to right click on the policy that we just created and we're going to select edit. So in the background there you see that there's nothing defined, it's a blank template right now. And for WSUS configuration, we want under computer configuration, open up policies. Below that we want administrative templates. So we'll expand that. Down here we want to select the Windows components. Once it loads, there we go. And then we want to come down and find Windows Update. Right here. If you're doing this and following along, feel free to resize your window so you can actually see everything that you're looking at without having to move around constantly. One thing I recommend doing is selecting the standard option here, just so we can see what our settings are and whether or not anything's been configured. If you're just looking through to see what's been set up, or if you're looking for an explanation of what something is, leave it on the extended and select an option, and it'll give you a description as to what exactly that setting will configure. So I'm going to hop back to standard, and we're looking for enable client-sided targeting right here. So we can double click on it, or you can right click and select edit. So we want to enable, which tells it that we are going to configure this. If you leave it as disabled, then the machines that this policy is applied to, all of those machines will use the Windows defaults, which would tell it to check in to the Microsoft servers for updates. So enabling it, we are going to put it into a target group. We created that in the last activity on the WSUS server. We actually created custom groups. The group that we are going to put this policy on is going to be the desktops. And that matches the group that we created on our WSUS server. And you can read through the full description of how this applies. And bring this up so we can hit OK. And then we can see that it has been enabled. There's no comments. If you ever want to, you can always throw a comment in here. For example, for this, we're going to say configure desktops to utilize WSUS on 4.11 server 2. And then it won't display the full comment, but it'll tell you there's some extra information in there. Often if we're doing this and we set up a script to run on boot up or on login, we'll add a comment in there stating exactly what script we're using. We'll give the location on the network as well as what the script is supposed to do. For example, install antivirus, and then we'll give the location of where that script is. And that way, if we ever need to come in and make changes, we can see that this is enabled. There's a comment. We can view the comment to see exactly what's going on. And if we need to troubleshoot, that's a great place to start, is to see where this is looking and what it's supposed to be doing, so you can troubleshoot the steps that it should be doing for you. Alright, so we have client-sided targeting enabled. Next, we want to configure automatic updates. So not configured allows the computer, whatever local policy is applied on the computer, to take priority. If you disable this, then again it will try to use the Windows defaults. And enabled actually allows us to configure when and where the machines will look for these updates. So you have different options here. Option 2, notify for download and notify for install. So the users will be prompted to download the updates, and then once they have been downloaded, the user will be prompted to install and reboot if necessary. 3 is to automatically download and notify for install, so there's no prompt to start the download for these updates. The user will only be notified that they're ready to be installed, and they'll have to agree to continue the installation and reboot if necessary. Number 4 here, automatically download and schedule the install. This will not give a user prompt. It will automatically download the appropriate updates to the computer, and then whatever time or day you schedule for the installation, they will automatically start the installation, and I believe it will still prompt a reboot if needed. And option 5 is to allow the local administrator to choose the setting, so that would again fall into the local group policy on each individual machine. Since we're trying to manage the entire domain, we probably don't want to select that option, because then we have to go to each individual machine to configure it, and that defeats the purpose of having domain policies. So I'm going to select option 3. They'll automatically download to the machines and prompt the user to install and reboot if needed. This option, installed during automatic maintenance, most of the time by default your automatic maintenance cycles start at 2 a.m. So if these machines aren't on at 2 a.m., they may not apply updates correctly, and you may end up seeing that for months on end your machines aren't getting their updates. So I recommend not using that option. For the installation day, you have your options. Every day is 0, and then each day of the week has a specific number. If you want it to always run maybe first thing Monday morning or first thing Wednesday morning. Microsoft usually pushes out their updates every Tuesday. So your server will then should be synchronized to pull down any new updates Tuesday night. So you could start pushing out new updates every Wednesday. Or maybe you have a test group of desktops that you want to push those updates to on Wednesday, and then give them a few days to see if there's any bugs associated with the new updates, and then for the rest of your domain, maybe push those updates out on Friday. So that way, if there are any problems, you can fix them or disable those updates on your server, so you don't mess up every single computer on your domain. In this case, I'm just going to leave it as every day, and you can then go and set the specific time. If your users shut their computers down every night, then you're going to want to take that into account and configure this for a time perhaps when they take lunch. Because the update services will use some resources on each machine. So them taking a lunch break is a great time to push updates. If you do that, you'll want to make sure that it's not going to force a reboot on them. Because if they go to lunch but they have their documents open and it forces a reboot, then they might lose some of the work that they've completed that morning. And you can read through the full description of everything. It's fairly detailed here. So we're going to go ahead and say OK, and that tells it when and how to do updates. Next, we need to tell it where to find these updates, and so we're going to select this option, specify Internet Microsoft Update Service Location. We can open that. Not configured will use the local policies on the machines. Disabled will try to use the Windows defaults, and enabled will allow us to control it. So the Internet location is going to be our WSUS server, whichever server we have running that service. So here we're going to tell it to look across HTTP, look to 411 server 2 at port 8530. Port 8530 is HTTP. Port 8531 would be HTTPS if you have that configured on your server. We're going to go ahead and put the same thing here. So the statistics server will allow you to generate reports based on groups or specific machines to see what updates they've installed and applied. It'll also let you know if there's been any updates that have failed to install or failed to download to that machine. So it's a good idea to receive those reports at least when you're initially setting everything up, so that way for the first couple of weeks you can make sure that your policies are being applied to the computers and that the computers are correctly getting their updates from your server. If you use the Microsoft Configuration Manager, SCCM, it does not automatically create these reports, and it won't actually do anything with these statistics. So if server 2 was an SCCM server, then it would be kind of pointless for the machines to send those statistics to it because it won't use them. So in a situation like that, you may have your SCCM for managing everything, and then perhaps you have a separate standalone server with WSUS installed as a downstream or a replication server, and have all of the machines send statistics to that server instead. Then you could use your other server to get your reports. Even though it wouldn't necessarily need to be managing anything, it would still get reports so you could see that updates are being applied correctly. In this case, I've only got the one WSUS server, so we're going to let it do everything and give it the OK. If you're following along, go ahead and take a look at a few of these other settings that you can configure. If you're not following along, I'm not going to dive into every single one of these. Just quickly glance over all of the options that you have and see that there's quite a bit that you can configure for this. If you need to pause it, now would be a good time. Just review those really quickly, and we'll move on. So we are done with editing that group policy. We want to use our F5 key and refresh. And that way we can come and actually see the settings that we've configured for that policy. And our scope tells us that we're targeting all of the desktops that are a part of the desktop group. So from here, I'm going to vary slightly from the book. The book recommends targeting the computer directly, or the OU that the computer is in, rather than the group. And I'll show you a quick difference for that here. So in our Active Directory, I've created the OU for our domain machines, and broken that down by desktops and later by laptops or whatever is needed. So one way you can set up your group policy would be to target this entire organizational unit, and that would be fine. Another way would be to target this organizational unit. It really depends on how your environment is set up and how you want to have everything organized. Another option that we're not going to use would be to target this machine specifically. So we would want to select computers here and give it the name of that specific computer, and that would tell it specifically to apply this policy to this computer directly. We don't need to do that because I've applied it via this group, and if we double click on the group and look at the members, there's that computer. But this way we could have a huge list of all of the computers or all the computers in a department and manage it as a group rather than by individual machines. So the next thing that we want to do is create a user account to log into this Windows 8 machine. So in our users folder, I'm going to go ahead and hide the advanced features. and we're going to create a new user. And the name will be Windows 8 last name user. Logon name will be Win8user. Go ahead and set up a password. I'm going to go ahead and set it to never expire so I don't have to change it the first time I log in. Let it create the account. I like to give it a little refresh once I've made any changes in here. That way I'm seeing the most recent data. And then we're going to come over to our Windows 8 machine. I was already logged in as the domain administrator, so I'm going to log out. And then we'll log in as Windows 8 user. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording while it sets up that user account. I will be back momentarily. Alright, now that we have been logged in, we first want to make sure that we have received that policy for Windows Updates configurations on this machine. There are several ways to get in to look at the Windows Updates. On Windows 8, you can right-click your Start button. I don't have that installed, or I do have the Classic Start installed. But on Windows 8, by default, you can right-click your Start button, select System, and then go to Windows Update in the bottom of the left pane. A couple of other ways to do it, to get there fairly quickly. Open a File Explorer, right-click on this PC, and go to Properties, and then Windows Updates. The one I have found to be the quickest, on the keyboard for the machine, press and hold your Windows key, and then tap your pause key, and that'll bring you to your system, and then you can select Windows Updates. So that's probably the fastest way I've found so far. We can see that it looks like it has not applied the policy, so we're going to want to run a command line, and we want to give it the command gpupdate/force, which forces the machine to go look at all of the policies that apply to it from the server and update those on the local machine. If we had not had this machine running and I had to turn this machine on and power it on, then it would have updated the policies during the boot process. But since it was already running, it did not do that. And let's take a look. And so it received the policies, but I may need to reboot before they will actually take effect. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a reboot command. And once we can get logged back in, we will go take a look and see that that policy, make sure that that policy is being applied. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back to that Windows Updates section where we were just at. That should show that it's configured by an administrator, and that will tell us that the policy is being applied correctly. Alright, so there we go. Managed by your system administrator. So we know that the policy is being applied now. If yours doesn't say that, there are a few tools that you can use. RSOP is kind of a first step in troubleshooting. This is the resultant set of policy. It won't show everything, and it does help to be logged in as an administrator, especially if you're trying to look at computer policies rather than user policies. Because I'm logged in as a user rather than an administrator, I can only view the user configurations, which I don't have anything configured yet, except for a password policy. So you'd want to do that as an administrator to view some of the computer configuration policies. Keep in mind that the RSOP doesn't always show everything. So another option is GP result, and then you can output a specific file. There's a switch I need to use. I think it's H. Yeah, the H switch. So we come back here, give it the H, and it will create that report and put it out as an HTML file in this case. Once that's done, based on the path I'd selected, it should be right at the root of the C drive, which of course it won't allow me to save there because I'm not an administrative user. Let's see if it'll let me save it. Just to the local user then. Alright, since it won't even allow me to save there, I'm going to go ahead and get the full path for this user. Documents. Take the full path and we'll try this again. I don't really need the quotes on there. I need to give a file name. Creating this report is a lot easier when you're logged in as an admin user. Alright, so let's take a quick look at the result. Alright, so we can see the username, the domain, group membership, security group membership. And then see if we can get group policies to show. So I wasn't really wanting to show it because I'm logged in as a user rather than an admin user. So if you are doing this, I would recommend logging in as a domain administrator, maybe not the top level administrator, but somebody with administrative rights. for group policy. This shows how often I log in as a basic user. Let's try as the admin. So GP results /H. Let's see if we can get it to put it right at the root of the C drive. And then just to make sure, I want to check one more thing here. You do have the option of targeting a specific user. For example, logged in as the admin, I could then target Win8 user. And we do that with the S switch, like right here. Or basic right here with just username. So we could do Win8 user. I think we could still add on you can't use verbose with an H output. Okay, so now in the root of my C drive, I have the full GP result, which will show me the admin user with the computer. So it should show pretty much everything that's being applied. So here we have our policy for passwords, and there's our Windows updates, so we can see that it is being applied to the computer at least. And if we look on the Windows 8 user, we can see password policies being applied for that user. And there we are. That even that user was getting the group policy for Windows updates using our server. This tool is also useful if you have conflicts between your group policy objects. If you forget the order that they're applied or the order that they have precedence, you can always come here to see, maybe I was expecting just WSUS clients to be my winning GPO. And so that would help you troubleshoot if you have conflicts between different policies that are trying to configure the same settings. You can make sure that the correct policy is getting precedence as needed. Anyways, I think it's a little bit more in-depth than was really necessary for the activity in the book, but I did want to add in some extra information. I hope it wasn't too much. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them for me below, and I will try to reply in a timely fashion. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.